Hello and welcome back to the 28th episode of Greek Speaks. This week we talk about Orpheus, the first emo musician, basically. I say that in the most lovingly way possible because he's one of my favorite heroes. So, Orpheus is the son of either one of the muses and a mortal man, or Apollo and a mortal woman, depending on your translation. He grows up pretty unassumingly. He can play music and play the lyre and, rocks roll toward him and the birds stop singing and he's basically a Disney princess with a lyre. Anyway, so he falls in love with this woman named Eurydice, and on their wedding day, she dies. It depends. Usually it's a force of nature. In most iterations, it's either a satyr chases her into a cliff or into a snake pit, or she just steps on a snake. Either way, she dies, and by the time Orpheus gets to her, she has gone to Hades. And Orpheus freaks out, and so Orpheus decides to go down the underworld and get his dead wife back. He relies on his music, and he plays a song for the ferryman, and Charon lets him pass, and he plays a song for Cerberus, and Cerberus lays down and puts his head on his paws and looks up adoringly because Cerberus is a good boy. He gets to the throne of Hades, and Hades is like, yo man, what up? Orpheus is like, hey, can I have my wife back, please? I love her. And, sings the sappiest romance songs to ever end in happiness. So Hades is like, okay, yeah, you can have your wife back, but on one condition, which is she's going to go behind you, and as long as both of you get into the light of day without looking behind her yourself, you guys can go back to being in the land of the living. And Orpheus is like, cool. And so Orpheus starts going up past Charon, past Cerberus, and he can't hear his wife, so he starts having doubts. And finally, he gets up to the peak of the outer world. And there's different translations for when he looks back, but my favorite, because it's most painful, is he steps out into the light and thinks it's fine to look back, but she hasn't stepped out of the underworld yet, so she gets dragged back into the underworld. Orpheus tries again to do this, to go back and get his wife, and Hades is like, no, there's no second chances kind of thing. And so Orpheus goes on a couple more adventures, and some iterations he's on he's one of the Argonauts, and stuff like that. He has a couple other adventures here and there. But finally, so the entire life after his wife dies, he's depressed, which is fair. I don't think anyone would not give him that. So he's depressed for the rest of his life, basically, and the Maenads, who are symbols of Dionysus and worship Dionysus, get really mad that he won't join a party, and so they rip him to shreds, which is this idea called spargmos, which actually was the thing in ancient Greece, which is basically just ripping up live things. Usually it was like a deer or like a squirrel or something, but in some cases in mythology, because it is human. So when his mom finds out that Orpheus has been killed, she finds his head, and his head is in the Muses' mansion on Mount Olympus now, basically. Anyway, so that's how Orpheus dies, and he's reunited with Eurydice, and it's all hunky-dory. He starts this cult called Orphism, which is basically an offshoot of Greek mythology, and it's all about people returning back from the dead, and that's more of an emphasis than normal Greek mythology is. That's why it's called Orphism, is because, like Orpheus, it's a lot more emphasis on dead and chthonic things. I'm not too familiar with Orphic mythology. In fact, I was reading a book a couple weeks ago that mentioned something. It said something like Persephone and the snake, and I was like, I've never heard of that. And then I googled it, and I realized it was an Orphic myth. So I do want to get more into the Orphic myths and figure that whole thing out. But I have not. If you have not listened to Hades Town, it is very good. I don't love all of the songs in it, and it's definitely not my favorite musical. But I will admit some of the songs are slappers, and if I understand the plot correctly, it is a very good interpretation and retelling of the Orpheus and Eurydice myth. This is also one of the myths that is retold a lot, just going into the underworld, and underworld trips in general happen a lot in mythology, but this one in particular, this one has a lot of echoes in Hades Town, and I think there's a myth about, or not a myth, I think there's an episode of Adventure Time that kind of plays off of this a little bit. I've never seen it, but that is all I have on Orpheus. If you have any questions or comments, as always, put them out in the comments, and if you want me to look at a specific myth in particular, put it down in the comments as well, and I will see you next week.